Good morning, everyone. I hope you're enjoying your time at the Data Harmony Users Group meeting this year. I apologize for the lateness today. Just making some final changes that weren't saved yesterday. We know how that goes. I'm an editorial project manager here at Access Innovations. I've been affiliated with Access Innovations since approximately 1996 and with Data Harmony since 1998. My most recent project that I managed for the editorial department and with the programming department was for Triumph Learning. We developed 2 taxonomies for this client in 2013. So our fabled approach to this project, starting right at the beginning, the existing information infrastructure wouldn't be able to make the leap, not this time, not this far into the future. Not without a strong axis revolving smoothly at the center of the knowledge matrix. Cross-linking the complex terminology sets that are going to be arriving at Triumph Learning from distant sources. For taxonomy development, we were tasked with developing taxonomies for the math and the English teams for Triumph Learning, because they're launching a new content management system last year in 2013 for their writing teams. And they needed integrated taxonomies for precise alignment of their standards-based instructional content. To design their vocabulary axis, this supplemental education publisher joined forces with Access Innovations for thesaurus development and customization. And this is from the press release in May 13th. The taxonomy contains terms reflecting concepts, skills, and learning standards in a hierarchical structure. So who is TriumphLearning.com? What is this organization about? They are a supplemental educational publisher that creates content for both print and digital media. As a leading educational content company and publisher of print and digital media for K through 12, they specialize in the Common Core state standards. And this is some verbiage from their website, TriumphLearning.com. And it's estimated that Triumph Learning material has provided Triumph Learning has provided instructional materials to approximately 25 million students. And in addition to the Common Core state standards, they specialize in state customized products for the goal of increasing student achievement and raising test scores. So a little more information about Triumph Learning and a mission statement of sorts. Their commitment to serving all students with a mix of tools and resources. For us here at Access Innovations, we knew that this project was going to be complex, and some of the information about what we were going to be building might come at a later time. The initial conversations were a little bit broad in general, but we knew immediately the types of content that they were going to be applying these taxonomies with. And the primary content I was told about in early meetings was quizzes, games, and learning videos. And that's in addition to text documents and for more along the lines of a tutorial format. And we knew that their content objects in their system, in their content management system, would need a great degree of interactivity. One example would be if a quiz question is answered incorrectly, the user is steered toward the relevant lesson based on the misconception that is represented by missing that question. So each question may relate to both a concept that is mastered and a misconcept for students who haven't mastered that item. And we were well aware that the terms in the taxonomies would have to describe a skill mastered or a learning misconcept that is usable in different ways across various grade levels and also across the various strands in the Common Core state standards. For the input content for this taxonomy development project, one of our major sources of input was an existing publication of the Common Core State Standards. And these are educational standards that were written in an organized fashion and based on consensus among key players. And this is where we started our development process. But we knew, at the same time that we started here, we knew that multi-directional navigation would be key for the client to actually implement the controlled vocabularies. Master skills I mentioned, we're going to look at that a little more. Learning concepts and misconceptions are going to be linked. So these images on this slide represent various branches inside the math taxonomy and also various branches inside the English taxonomy. Both taxonomies are going to reflect this structure. We also knew early on that alphanumeric coding of the Common Core State Standards would have to be included in the term names, in the term records, inside the taxonomy branch that's dedicated to the Common Core. And the coding is needed for many reasons, some of which I may never see. Some of them include data linking, automated search procedures, and the capability for robust indexing of content. There we go. Also, in the early project goals for math and English language arts, the idea, in speaking with the clients, of we need all this information in the form of taxonomies and we need it linked, but can you keep it separate? So this is the term they used, agnostic spine, to describe how the branches inside the taxonomies are going to have a degree of separation or difference. So there may be more variability from one branch to another in the main structure than we as information professionals tend to think would be used in a thesaurus. Knowing that up front made it easier for us. We weren't trying to make each branch formatted or even configured identically to the other branches. About the content, the input that's going to be interacting with the taxonomy, the content objects in Triumph Learning System are going to be closely mapped to the Common Core State Standards. And they're also going to be closely tied to master skills, learning concepts, and misconcepts, as I called them. Other goals for an information project for Access Innovations. This is more along the line of how we're going to help many clients. This client also wanted subject term authority lists. So mathematics and English reflected in the form of taxonomy branches that indicate what terminology is going to be needed that is non-educational in nature. So our first goal was educational in nature. Let's convert these Common Core State Standards. But very closely behind that goal came the goal of also generating some good taxonomic branches for them to use as tools. They want to improve the metadata that they attach to their content objects in their system. Triumph Learning also told us that their editors are going to need to find these content object materials in small pieces so they can combine them together as time goes on in new product combinations. Which brings me to the title of today's talk, Thesaurus Master Customizations and Taxonomy Design for Triumph Learning. Obviously, it was a multifaceted project. Among the initial project directives were to design multidimensional term mappings that would interrelate across the diverse taxonomy branches that I already outlined, and to capture the Common Core State Standards in a solid thesaurus hierarchy that reflects the internal strengths of the standards themselves. In order to do this, we had to be flexible with our configuration in data harmony, and I got some good practice in the configuration module that I hadn't had before as we learned how they were going to use these terms and the codes that are captured with them, and how the two branches, the two main taxonomies, how their users might differ in how they're going to use the material. The math team may have very different overall goals than the English language team. So the flexible configurations came into play in different ways in each one. We also knew early on that we would be supporting pre-flight testing for this client with clear design principles for their content management system launch. And that's because they wanted to build multi-directional navigation based on these taxonomies to improve their creative writing environment. Are there any questions so far? Two main branches, a lot of project goals. We have a feeling we're going to need flexible configurations. We also have a sense we may be asking data harmony developers to customize the software in some ways, but we did not know early on what they might be. Related items of interest at an early stage included the knowledge that storing standards, a standards publication in the form of text, is an unusual use for thesaurus software. And the asterisk refers to a slide several slides later where we see this in play. We also knew the standards coding scheme is going to be captured, and it's alphanumeric, and this client is not interested in building a rule base. Yes?
Is this a proprietary CMS that they
Oh.
have developed?
Good question. It is, I believe the name is Xsquire or Xspire. It's built on a MarkLogic system. And Margie may have more information about that if you're curious about the system that they migrated the taxonomies into for content. I mentioned we thought we might be customizing our software to maximize project gains for this client. It turned out we did need to generate a new export to drive their content management engines. Something of a spoiler alert. We visualized the solutions and worked together to make them happen. A lot of the credit goes to Mary for coordinating the effort between editorial and programming, and Lamine was the lead programmer on the export customization and on the other one that Margie mentioned, which is for using emphasis. And we will see that soon. In order to get there, I need to talk a bit about our input data for this project. Some of you may have seen the Common Core state standards mentioned in the newspaper. What are they? Good question. Our clue is the name may be considered misleading. They're not exactly state standards for a given state or even for all the states. In a very real sense, they are national standards because it's one unified national federal standard created from a consensus process in the United States. And for implementation, individual states may comply following their own regional indications on their own prerogative. They can implement the full set of standards or some parts of it, or individualize the material into something new and apply it to the goals that they have in their state. For example, New Mexico. This is from the New Mexico Common Core website. And looking at it briefly, we see that the portal into this website is organized by the target audience. They have information for students available, parents, teachers, and administrators. And this reflects the underlying goals of these Common Core state standards as a national effort to move education forward. Is let's address all the audiences that need this standard in the ways that they need it. And actually, I was reading more about Triumph Learning yesterday, and all 4 groups apply to Triumph Learning. This slide is already outdated. They're a bit on the cutting edge. They've developed products. Some of these may be related, the teacher and admin materials they develop. But this basically, the Common Core State Standards website here in New Mexico reflects the general movement of these standards in other states as well, and with publishers, as we see today. This is an example of the Common Core State Standards for mathematics. And we are in the grade level 5 geometry section. You see some of the structure. You see the code 5.g, 5.g there. Capturing this in the form of a thesaurus is an unusual goal. It's an unusual task for thesaurus software. So we adapted to that irregularity by streamlining the term names. The client originally wanted this entire paragraph to be your Common Core State Standard Geography 5.g.1, and that's your term. But we as taxonomists and people who organize information know that this is not a very good chunk of text for using in metadata. It's not going to make a very good term for searching or for indexing the content of something, what it's about. So our response to that was to streamline the term names, and they wound up including the code and a shortened version of this text. We also captured the text in its own field so that the client wouldn't lose any of the information. If one of their writers looks at a term and says, I don't understand which concept this is about. On this slide, our question for the audience is, what do you see unusual about the parenthetical statement at the end of this standard? Anyone? And you're welcome to cheat if you worked on Triumph Learning. Several of us worked on this, and Margie mentioned it before I started speaking. This character is in italics. Not necessarily something you would notice glancing at this page. For our purposes in developing the taxonomies, we had to notice it. This is the nature of the input source for the Common Core branch, one for math, one for English. So we implemented a flexible configuration for each term record. And as I mentioned, we streamlined the term names into a more usable size. And that in itself, streamlining the Common Core State Standards and capturing that with coding is a considerable added value to the standard. This client is already starting to gain from asking us to work on the standard because they have a usable concept term somewhere there. And we'll see more examples as we go. Probably waiting to see what I have to show you in data harmony. Here is the mathematics taxonomy for Triumph Learning, the 9th iteration. Two main branches inside this taxonomy are mathematics. That includes general mathematics terms and that kind of information, those kinds of terms. And the Common Core State Standards, where we started the data conversion process. So you see that that term we were looking at fits on one line. Also, you may notice the coding is right inside the term name. 5.g space geometry is your term name. That's because this client isn't using a rule base. They don't need these terms right here to be perfectly usable in line. They don't need these terms, as we think of preferred terms, to be useful in analyzing text. What they're looking for is to capture the state standard or the national standards in a way that they can implement further programming. The Common Core code is stored in its own field within the Common Core grade level branch. That's the CCSS code field. And the full text of the standard is captured in the CCSS math text field. And this field here, related standard, we used similar to the way we might use a related term field. but it's only used to link the Common Core branch to the Master Skills branch. So in the Master Skills branch, there's a term, use a pair of perpendicular number lines, axes, to define a coordinate system, and that relates over here to the Common Core that we are seeing on screen. This is the configuration that we wound up with. You see a field down here, student-facing skill. That leads us to our next configuration item for discussion. And I mentioned again that we are working with terms that will not have rules. It gave us a certain amount of freedom in how we configured the terms. We were able to get away with things that we might not be able to get away with in other environments, in other vocabularies. For example, the colon skills topic, the coordinate plane. For a lot of clients, we would probably shorten this to coordinate plane. This branch, this sub-branch, Mathematics Master Skills, the sub-branch of the general math branch, is where Triumph Learning's terminology is captured. So the writers who put quizzes and learning videos together have their own lists of educational skills that a student needs to master. And so it's the Master Skills branch. And inside you see a number of strands of content. Algebra, for example, data analysis, and geometry. And there are more. And these strands for the Triumph Learning terminology are parallel to the strands of content, the content areas in the Common Core standards as well. This is another good example of a flexible configuration. Now that we're in a skills term, we see the related standard has the Common Core standard where we were before. In the Master Skills sub-branch for Triumph Learning, they wanted inside the taxonomy to have a way that they could capture material for separate display, for different display uses. And even though we originally configured the student-facing and teacher-facing skills as non-preferred terms, we had to change them into text fields because the client wanted to use the same phrasing twice. So both the teacher-facing skill and the student-facing skill for this term might be exactly the same, understand the origin. And there'd be other places in the skills branch where there's a lot of variability between the way a student talks about geometry, for example, and the way the educator talks about it, the teacher or the tutor. So we've looked at the configuration requirements and a bit of how they turned out and why. And midstream we had a challenge regarding the taxonomy export format. This client wanted to import it directly into their content management system without a separate programming step in between, which meant that our export module in Thesaurus Master, or Maestro, well, Thesaurus Master in this case, is going to need to accommodate this goal. They wanted groups of their terms, for example, in the grade level branch for Common Core, you want each group nested inside its broader hierarchy level, but that's not the way that Data Harmony usually groups term records in the storage file or in the export file. So this represents the number one goal they had. Hey, convert these standards into a hierarchy for us, capture the codes, and export them nested in this way in an XML export. And this was a bit challenging for us to get to the point where we understood exactly what they needed. But once we got the one, the second one was easier. And audience question for this one is, do you see a difference between the two? English Language Arts, Common Core, the standard, has more detail at the narrowest level inside the Common Core standard level term, you may have also a component level subterm. This is where we applaud Lamine for customizing our export format that contains the full path through the branches of the vocabulary for every preferred term, which means that from any location, this XML export can answer the question, how did we get here? This XML export can answer the programmer's query, I don't want to know the details, but how did we come through your hierarchy to reach this term? This export has it. Using term lists, Lamine grouped the terms in a way that he could capture this information that hadn't been previously captured. And this enables XML developers, both the Triumph Learning folks and others, to develop hooks and hook into the upward-downward paths that exist in any good hierarchy, and especially for this input data in the Common Core branches. This capability for the full path export was in addition to other functions that Triumph Learning was busy building based on the other fields I showed you in the term record, based on those related fields, the code fields, and the term IDs that we don't see on screen. They're using a lot of that information because they're building the content management system at the same time that we're building the taxonomy and configuring the term records for it. There it is, full path. Try it sometime. It is one of our standard export formats now. This is an example inside full path. Some of this may be familiar to some of you. The T is commonly used in data harmony to indicate term name. So you see what I was saying before, that the preferred term in their math taxonomy isn't highly usable as a subject indexing term. There are too many words, you may have punctuation, and so on. You see a lot of use for statements here. I wanted anyone who typed in any of these to go to that branch for the grade level math standards terms.
So you don't have the usual BTNTs in this?
BTNTs in data harmony are represented slightly differently. There may be BTs and NTs inside this export, but they're not on screen. You might have to check with Margie or Lamine.
And so the BTMT drives a hierarchical relationship. This clearly has a hierarchical relationship, but we don't call them BTMTs
Yeah,
in this
that's the
application.
difference, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're all explicit. That's right.
Because they are nested standards and because Triumph Learning provides supplemental materials for education, they need to plug in specific areas where people need remedial help.
So this is the full path export in one example. As I said, give that a try. In addition to the full path export that the client was talking about on our weekly calls, we learned about something midstream, and I took the name out, don't worry. So the entire project was February 15th to May 15th. We were building 2 taxonomies. I spoke about the complexity. On May 17th, when we were thinking we were wrapping some things up, we learned about italics. Email goes by, a slight panic in the room, a couple desks. It looks like nothing is italicized in the math taxonomy in Thesaurus Master. This is someone from Triumph Learning. We need a lot of italicization in math. We need this italicization to surface in the CMS. I presume it needs to appear in the taxonomy. And then this sender wrote a favorite example of why they need variables, mathematical variables, to be in ital. If I get in the way here, A. Sounds pretty silly if it's not a variable. On a number line diagram by marking off A lengths 1 over B from 0. So that A is different than a non-italicized A, And this is the first time that we heard that. This is more material from the Common Core state standards for math. We converted the standards for math and English for grades 3 through 8 and are waiting to see if Triumph wants to load in grades K through 2. So this is from somewhere in grades 3 through 8 in the math, speaking about products. A couple different reasons you see for emphasis. The English majors or copy editors, technical writers may see someone's trying to emphasize a point here. Why a particular mathematical statement is true or where. And they should probably put italics right there to be consistent in their writing. And for our purposes, for data conversion, once we're capturing italics as emphasis for mathematical variables A, B, C, X, Y, and any variables they need, once we're capturing emphasis for that, we should capture it for the inline use in English, in the writing. This is from the introduction. Still looking into math taxonomy. Inside our main branch for math, we have mathematics concepts, or you might consider a whole thesaurus in itself. Mathematics master skills, that's the branch that we looked at that reflects Triumph Learning's own way of talking about math skills. They have a small sub-branch called misconceptions, and we also have a reference subjects branch. And here we see emphasis in action. This is our test term. Right-clicking on the left side pane in Thesaurus Master to add a term or to change a term. Doing that right-click function brings up this pop-up with your emphasis buttons. And you highlight the word that you want, press the button, it puts the appropriate tags around it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Can you also just type the tags right in if you want?
Yes. But you have to get them right.
Well, yeah.
Or else someone who's sending an export in short notice says, wait, what is it choking on? The export filter for this data, if you have questions about it, you're welcome to check with Lamy. The export filter for the full path export that this client needed had to accommodate these tags that we hadn't used in this way before. So we're using standard HTML emphasis tags you might recognize, and Data Harmony will have to accommodate that at other steps of the information flow.
Would there be a case here for going to MathML as opposed to just emphasis tags, which would then clearly define it as a math?
Well, what was the alternative you mentioned?
There could be. So MathML is another one of the variations which Dave is very familiar with, and we could substitute MathML overall instead of XML behind the scenes in Thesaurus Master. We're not sure yet whether this will fully work the way we want it to with Maestro. So remember I said yesterday, this isn't, well, you weren't here yet. This isn't going to happen for Maestro until we've done a lot of testing with it. It works in Thesaurus Master. I think we could put MathML in Thesaurus Master. Whether we can do MathML or even just this little bit of emphasis without a fair amount of fiddling into MAI, we aren't sure yet. We just need to test it.
Some of the overlap happens right here at the angle bracket character. In mathematics, I'm sure that a math markup language schema has a way of capturing less than and greater than that's better than a regular text system. And that would be great for a purpose like this. It's good to know that that is in use. In this case, we went with the regular HTML and fixed the bugs that arose. And as Bob mentioned, you can add those tags manually yourself, which gives us the capacity to put them where the full text is captured. So the Common Core, if we were in the grade level looking at a state standards term, as we were before, there would be plus because there's data here. If there are italicized variables in the full text, they'll be captured there using the same tagging. Here's one of our test terms. And I left it in there for the client, figured whichever piece of the pipeline that popped out, oh, hey, there's the bold, italics, and underline. They can immediately tell, is this working? Is it snagging? And on this slide, you can see that the italics, well, all the emphasis, but in this example, italics is visible in the narrower term field for this broader term math. So it's usable anywhere the term name is used broader, narrower, relateds. For Triumph Learning taxonomies, we did not work a whole lot with non-preferred terms. So here it is in action, a little more intense data for this example. This master skills term has the variables in italics, and it links over to a Common Core term that has the same variables in italics. Once again, the related standard field is the pathway between these two branches that need to be closely mapped to each other. And you see in the term record, the term name at the top, we haven't worked out how to get that to display in bold, but you do see the tags that reflect it's been captured. It will be displayed. A will be displayed in italics, A over B. And our outcome and results for this case study I present today are we accomplished our project goals a little longer than we thought at first, which happens. And those goals included both inline and export-based customizations. What about the future that's speeding towards your organization? Will you be ready? Are your customer services or IT departments buried in streams of big data arriving at light speed? There's the light speed. I like this image. To me, it represents the axis. I had to think in terms of an axis in order to visualize this project. And some general marketing. Do employees waste time and energy duplicating work that's already completed because you need a taxonomy or a thesaurus? Maybe so. Is your message getting lost? Or on the other hand, if you've implemented a taxonomy or thesaurus, is your message getting across in more instances? And last, are key team leaders in your organization constantly on the search for data integration solutions, talking about making gains in efficiency without knowing where to begin? Please let us help you. Any questions at this point? Customizations in data harmony and flexible adaptation to the workflow is what we're seeing in this. And the tree, the branches are all there, connected to each other, what we're aiming for. Thank you very much for your attention.